Hey, welcome back to another episode of From Pen to Page. Today we are dealing with the final question of the 5 things you need to know before you start or as you're writing your book, your short story, or your screenplay. So stay tuned and let's jump into it. So question number 5, the final question, really doesn't have much to do with the actual writing. It has to do with you. And that is, what are your expectations? What are your goals with your writing? The first thing you should know as you're thinking about your expectations or your goals with your writing projects is you need to be confident in your idea, which means really, how do you know if your idea is good enough for a story? Stephen King said, the way he knows a story is worth writing is if it sticks around in his head for a long time. Does that story keep popping up in your head over time, over days and weeks and months? If it keeps coming back to you, that might be a sign that it is worth writing, and you should be confident in that. The next thing to be aware of is that writing a short story, especially writing a novel or a screenplay, it's a journey, it's a process. It's not an overnight thing. It's going to take you time. It's going to take you a lot more time than you probably expect. For me, writing The Soothsayer, what I thought was going to be a short story, took 6.5 years to write and to really get it to a place where I felt comfortable sharing it with people. So just be aware that writing is a journey unto itself. Sometimes you'll write stories that you may never even share. You'll throw them into the bin for later. Maybe you can redevelop them again at a later time. And sometimes you will share them. Just be sure to write consistently. I covered this in my writer's block video, but I'm going to just restate it here. It's not so important when you're writing, especially the first draft, to write an amazing opus. Just get it down on the page. That's probably one of the most important things you can do, is be consistent and get it down first. You can always go back later and edit it. You can always go back later and recreate scenes that you're not happy with. But get the initial broad strokes down. The next thing you need to know is you have to be brave. Anyone who says writers don't have courage has never written a damn word in their life, because let me tell you something, pouring out your heart onto the page and then showing it to people is terrifying. And you have to be able to do that at some point, especially if you want readers, right? Be prepared to do your revisions. Be prepared to make changes in your developmental story process and in your characters, but also be prepared for the feedback that you'll get. Now, there's a little blog I did years ago on what constitutes good versus bad feedback, and I'll try and give you the high points of it. Basically, good feedback is when someone understands what you're trying to do and gives you some feedback on how they felt about what you did. For instance, if you're writing a story, like I wrote a fantasy, I got feedback that said, I really liked these characters. I liked what was going on. I didn't really understand why this character did this one thing. Okay, that's pretty good feedback. That gives you an idea of where you need to spend a little more time with descriptions or where you need to flesh out a scene a little bit more. That's pretty good descriptions. Now, I also got some negative feedback for The Soothsayer very early on, where someone said, this is totally wrong. You don't know what you're doing. This is so contrite. This is so, cliche. And, you really need to do it like I do it. I had a writer tell me that once. Pretty negative. If someone doesn't understand the premise of your idea, if they don't understand what you're trying to do, if they just don't like it for that, they're not worth getting feedback from, because they already don't get it and they're not your audience. You want people to understand you and understand what you're trying to do. So super important. Now, do they give specific feedback? They can. Some people say, oh, specific feedback, is terrible. I don't think so. I think if someone offers up an idea like, what if you did this, this, or this? That's an idea. You don't have to go with it. But them telling you, what's more important is them telling you what they didn't understand, what didn't make sense. So be courageous in offering your work to others and getting that important feedback, especially early on when you're drafting. And finally, be aware that when you're ready to publish, it is a whole nother universe. I plan on doing a video series just on my experiences with publishing my first book. I'll do that at some point in the future, but it's a whole separate process from writing. In fact, it's really two jobs. As an author, you think your job is done when you've revised 1,000 times and gotten enough good feedback and, gotten it, edited and all that stuff, but it's not. Your job is only half done at that point. The other half is getting it onto the marketplace in front of readers' eyes. And in today's world, in today's publishing world, it is a labyrinth of things, twists and turns, and you have a lot of information being thrown at you from a lot of different sources, and it can feel totally overwhelming. You can publish vanity presses through a vanity press, which there are a lot of them today. You can hybrid publishers, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's traditional publishing deals. Vanity presses back in, decades ago were basically any small printing house that would cover all, would do the cover and put it in book form and put it out there with almost no checking of the manuscript. They had zero, baseline requirements for the book. And so a lot of really crappy books got put out that way. They will charge you for every aspect of publishing your book. That's vanity publishers. I would not recommend them. The second one is hybrid publishers. Hybrid publishers are kind of new, and publishing today is a little bit like the Wild West, in that these companies come along and they'll do a lot of the same things that vanity publishers will do, and they might do it very well. They can do cover design. They can provide editors for your manuscript to help you polish it. They can do the layout of your book so that it looks correct in, a paperback or a hardcover or in an ebook. And occasionally they'll even do marketing. And there's a whole slew of marketing services that are available. Now, again, you are covering the lion's share of the costs, but sometimes they'll kind of do a split with you and you'll get a higher percentage than you would with traditional deals. Anyways, so there's that. And there are hybrid publishers that are pretty good, and there are some that you should probably avoid. I would suggest Googling. There's a lot of sites online right now that can kind of give you an idea of what publishers you might want to avoid, or which ones really don't do that good of a job, and which ones are worth looking into if you're not interested in going through the steps yourself. Anyways, hybrid publishers are there. Traditional publishing. Now, that is the one that everyone thinks of when they write a book. Traditional publishers are usually only accessed through an agent. There are some publishing houses that will accept unsolicited material, but when you send in your manuscript, you had better be sure that it is perfect. And so it is worth investing in an editor to really help you polish your manuscript and get it to a point that you want to submit it and you feel confident in submitting it. But even then, even if it's the most wonderful literature ever created, the chances that it'll get through are very slim. There are about 5 major publishing houses today in the US. There are many subsets and imprints of these 5 major publishing houses, but it really boils down to 5. Having an agent will get you through some of that slush pile. It might get you past a couple of the interns. But again, it is a very long process. And if and when you do actually get a deal or are offered a deal, you won't be offered a ton. You might get, I don't know, a few hundred to a couple $1,000s advance, but that's about it. You're not going to get a huge percentage of the royalties. You're not going to get a huge percentage of the royalties. So Be aware of that. I guess I should say there's one more thing. That's self-publishing. That's what I'm doing with the Soothsayer, self-publishing. I've used some hybrid services, third-party services like Enchanted Ink Publishing to kind of help me polish and get the book ready for print. So just be aware. Keep your expectations in check. Writing is a journey. It's not an overnight thing. It's going to take you time. But if you feel confident in what you've written, if you're brave enough to get helpful feedback and brave enough and patient enough to do the revisions needed, if you're consistent in your writing and consistent in trying to improve, and if you're aware of the publishing process, the things that you should avoid and the things you should look for when publishing, and that the fact that it might cost you a pretty penny to get your first book out there, then you're ready to take on writing that book or the short story or the screenplay. I hope the series has been helpful for you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.